This video will help you fill in the top part of your page right here. Don't worry about whether it says grade 8 or grade 7. The top part, this section right here, is the same no matter which one we're looking at. We're going to start with pitch. So as I go through this slideshow, you are going to write down the keywords that we have up here. So the pitch refers to the height of the sound, whether it's a high pitch or a low pitch. A quick example would be this. You can hear on that example that we went from high to low. That's the pitch. That's the difference in whether it's high or low when you hear it. You could also have medium, which would be the middle part of that range that we played. So you on your handout should have high, low, and medium written down in the blank that's right next to pitch, high, low, and medium. The next musical term, actually we call these the elements of music. So the next element of music that I'm going to cover is tempo. This one I've used in class a fair number of times. Tempo is referring to the speed of the music. So in your blank, you're able to write down fast, slow, and medium. And this is referring to a lot of movement in music. To play some examples, we have some fast right here. And by contrast, some slower, longer notes. That last one would be an oboe that I gave as an example. So ultimately, tempo means the speed of the music. The dynamics, that's your volume control, how loud the music is. Loud, soft, and crescendo are words that I'd like you to write down. Loud and soft kind of go without explaining. Crescendo is when the music gradually gets louder. So it starts at a softer volume and then gets much, much louder. In music, you will see different symbols, these short forms that are in the music, and there's an Italian term for them. So the double F is fortissimo, which means very loud. Another example would be MP, which means mezzo piano, moderately soft. Essentially, piano is soft, fortissimo or forte is loud. Crescendo is the one that I mentioned before because I asked you to write down soft, loud, and crescendo. Crescendo is shown with a symbol like this. Sometimes it's written like this, but it's gradually getting louder. You can have the opposite where you're diminuendo or decrescendo, which means gradually getting softer. Now we're moving down that sheet. You've gotten past dynamics. You've written in loud, soft, and crescendo. Rhythm and duration, that's referring to the length of the notes. So if the note is short, maybe one of these, then it's a shorter duration. Sometimes it's not colored in and therefore is longer. We can also have syncopated. Short and long are fairly straightforward. Syncopated just means that when you play your note, it's not on the beginning of the beat. So if I were conducting, your note wouldn't start when my hand is bouncing. It would start off of the beat. An example just to speak it would be bum ba da dum ba da dum. When you heard the ba, that one was off the beat. It'll make more sense when we get to the point where you're able to play these. Articulation. The attack is how the sound starts. The decay is how the sound stops. Essentially, articulation is how you pronounce the note. Whether we're talking about the beginning of the pronunciation or the end of it, you've been working with me on crisp tonguing. That's a crisp articulation. There's also smooth, where instead of a t, you might be doing a n in order to make it even more smooth. And slurred is when you actually move from one note to the next with no tonguing at all, which is actually harder to do than you may realize because your fingers have to line up perfectly when you play that. So to get back to our sheet, we should have crisp, smooth, and slurred next to articulation. Crisp, smooth, and slurred. You had short, long, and syncopated in the rhythm duration. You can always pause this video as we're going through if you need to in order to get the time to write things down. Now on to texture. Oh, I did want to play some staccato and some legato as far as the articulation. You don't need to know all of these terms as long as you know that one is short and one is longer. If you listen to this on the violin, it starts with longer notes, then it has some shorter staccato notes. That one, it had the combination of both. The texture, it's the thickness of the sound. It's basically how many instruments you have playing and whether they've got different sounds to the instruments. Because if they're all the same instrument, then it still kind of sounds like one instrument. But if you've got a variety, then you've got a thicker texture. So in your blank, you're writing in thick, thin, and varying. Because sometimes you'll have a solo and then suddenly the whole band comes in and then back to something that's solo. So one person on their own would be a great example of thin. An entire orchestra would be a great example of thick. And then there's a lot of variation in between where you could have small ensemble or you could have even a rock band where it has a variety of sounds, but it's not really as diverse as what an orchestra would be. The tone color or the timbre. I know it doesn't look like it's timbre, but that's actually how you say this word. The tone color is the quality of sound produced by a voice or an instrument that is distinctive. It sounds like that sound. For example, hearing me talk on the video, you've got a pretty good idea of who it is. Not just because I'm your music teacher, but because it sounds like my voice. If you heard someone walk by in the hallway and there was a squeak, you might recognize it as the squeak of a running shoe on the floor. If you heard balls bouncing in the gym, it would sound like balls bouncing in the gym, and you'd recognize it because it sounds like that. That's the tone color or the timbre, that distinctive quality of the sound that makes it sound like that sound. In your blank, you're writing in bright, mellow, dull, and sharp. And I'm going to play a few examples for you, and you're going to see if you can guess what instruments you hear playing, and I will show them to you after so you can see if you guessed right. This is the first example. See if you can do them by name, but if not by name, then at least by the families of the orchestra. So the strings, the woodwinds, the brass, and the percussion. Woodwind would also include saxophone and clarinet. Brass would also include your trombones, your tubas, things like that. Percussion, anything you hit, scrape, or shake. And strings can be larger as well as the smaller violin. Here's your first one to guess. Take a moment to see if you can figure out what was playing. Pause the video and guess in class. So you'll see we had, I'll move this over a little bit more. The saxophone and the trombone were what you heard first, and the super high notes were on the trumpets. In the back, you've got a sousaphone. And you've got a tiny little drum set with the cymbal there, just snare and cymbal. Okay, next one to guess. Here it is. You can pause the video to share your guesses. You probably figured out that violins, were there, but you may not have heard the flute. The flute blended with the violins really, really well, so it was hard to pick that one out. And I want to see if I can fast track this a little bit so you can hear this super high note was actually played on the clarinet. Okay, just before I move on, make sure next to tone, color, and timbre you have bright, mellow, dull, and sharp written down. And last, we have melodic contour. So that's basically what you would get if you connected all the dots. If you connected the notes, the overall shape, the contour. So here we've got rising then flat, you've got up and down, falling, those sorts of things. What you should write down for terms, we've got the rising. You could write dropping or falling, that would work too. Stepwise, that means that as you move your notes, you're going up each line in space, step by step, or even down step by step, but you're not making any leaps. Leaps would be the opposite of stepwise, or at least the contrasting term. Okay, so that means that you have filled in the blanks for all of these, and now you're going to move on to a video that talks about specific song examples.